And you mentioned there the sort of the scale of LiveScore Group now. We're going to come on to that in a little while, but I first sort of wanted to maybe go back in time a little bit, which might be a fun activity for you as well, to sort of think back, I guess, to how you sort of started out in your professional career. I guess one of the first things I actually wanted to ask was, where you grew up. Where was that?
How far back do you want to go?
Oh,
I am 53 years old after all, so it's a long history. Well, let's keep it on the professional context. My interest in this space, in sports media, but also particularly in sports betting, started when I was at university in Boston in the US. I'd never heard of sports betting before, but I was an avid sports fan. And I was very much into math, so those interests kind of came together and became very interested in sports betting. So that really started off my career. I was involved in sports betting during the years at university. We're talking late 80s now. And then, when I went back to Turkey, which is where I was born in 1996, the internet started surfacing, and in 1998 I started one of the world's first online sports books. So that's how the journey started, and I've been at it since then. One industry, but certainly evolving.
Yeah, for sure. And do you remember the first sort of leadership role you entered into, even like in any context whatsoever, not even necessarily a professional environment, even when at university, maybe whether it was like a committee or a sports team or something similar like that?
I was into school politics at a young age, so just as early as like middle school, I was, class president, also taking positions in school committees. But real leadership, and probably still the most challenging one I've had to do, is when I had recently graduated, I had to take over my family's textile business, which was not doing that well at the time. So I had to wind it down, and as a kid at that age, that taught me a lot of lessons, how to engage on a personal level with your team, even in crisis moments, and how to be transparent and honest. And I've stuck to those principles that have worked really well throughout my career since then.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that was kind of a situation, I suppose, where leadership was almost thrust upon you in a way. Do you think when you were sort of starting out in your career, did you always have in mind that you wanted to become, a leader, that you would ultimately end up being the CEO of a company at like the most senior level? Or was it,
definitely
your ambitions
not. Definitely not. I think life is so predictable that all you can do is prepare yourself for different scenarios that it will throw at you. And the fact that maybe my family business did not go well threw me to be more creative and more entrepreneurial, and to launch a startup and trying to build something on my own instead of relying on our legacy business all the time. And that is what really builds your leadership traits, not the stuff that you learn at school.
Yeah, for sure. And when you and sort of when you were sort of starting out, and when you said you launched that startup, and now that you've sort of been holding these leadership roles for the last kind of 20 years as well, what would you say your leadership style is now, do you think? Do you think it's kind of would you say you're sort of a people person? Would you say you're hands-on, hands-off? What leadership do you think you sort of adopted over?
That's a great question, because it's certainly very, very different. Early on in my career, I'd have the idea and then I execute it. I'd develop, even code it, manage the product, manage the marketing, or be at least very much involved in the execution of each of those functions that are usually common in any kind of like online business. Nowadays, it's more about determining the vision, establishing a culture, or deciding what kind of culture is needed, and then finding the right people who believe in that vision and strategy to follow you. And that's really my job these days, making sure good people believe in the vision that I want to pursue, and give them the right environment to execute.
Yeah, sure. And you mentioned at the start that your leadership style would you'd have the idea and you'd execute on it. Was part of that, I guess, you quite like being in control of the destiny and being able to control the results. Is there part of things where, I suppose, when you leave things to other people, because I suppose a lot of people experience that in multiple different roles, not even just as a CEO. I suppose you get department heads who, it can be quite difficult sometimes to hand things off to a more junior member to carry out a task that maybe you have an idea, you picture in your mind of how you want it done. Was that kind of something you had to learn to kind of adapt to a little bit?
I would say partly the fear that the quality that you expect from that execution is not going to be there if it's delegated to somebody else. But I'd say it's a small part. The larger part is I couldn't afford it. So early on in the businesses that I was involved, it's not like I could go out and hire as many people as possible or the best people to perform a certain job, so I had to do it and be good at it myself. But yeah, there's certainly that concern that maybe you're not going to get the same output. But part of being a good leader is being able to amplify your skills through other people. So today I find myself more and more engaging with my team and colleagues to make sure that I can onboard them with the knowledge that I have and then give them the environment so they can execute. Because I can't do everything on my own, obviously, at this scale. So the best thing I can do is try to deliver that knowledge and experience to as many people as possible so that the organization can take that and execute in the right way.
Yeah. And I think it's been an interesting few years, I guess, for business leaders in every industry, basically, on the back of with COVID, as you alluded to earlier, and then the macroeconomic climate we've all been experiencing in the wake of that, and some people have had to make very difficult decisions. Perhaps it's been different at LiveScore from what we've seen in terms of the growth of the business, but there have been companies that have had to restructure, make layoffs, etc. Are there parts of being a leader which are sometimes uncomfortable or difficult or challenging, or is kind of part of what makes a good leader being able to make those difficult decisions, being able to face up to those challenges and respond to them?
I think both those statements are correct. It's been extremely challenging, and like I've said before, like the key is trying to be as honest and transparent as possible. And our business was formed in 2019. I don't think we've had a year where things were normal. We were faced with the pandemic early on, and we had to do a lot of crisis management. I had to be in front of our team every week, giving them updates, trying to make sure that people felt confident that our business was sustainable. But you're also asking yourself, is it really sustainable? So if you go out there and say everything is great, we have funding that will last us 5 years and we can stay in this state with no sports content forever, our investors will keep giving us cash, you'd be lying to them, and that gets picked up immediately. So what I found out, and this wasn't based on previous experience or any books, it's the more authentic you come out, the more credible you are. With all your flaws, you have to come out and give your position and your views, and then let your audience decide, which is in that case your colleagues, to decide what the outlook is. Luckily, the sports content returned probably quicker than everybody expected, so we overcame that and we came out stronger than even before. But then, macroeconomic environments, the war came, and we have 150 colleagues in Ukraine. So here you go, another crisis. How do you make sure that team, has the peace of mind to be able to perform? How about, again, the investors? They're looking at the backbone of your business being Ukraine. How do you communicate with them and give them assurances that your business has redundancies in place and can, tackle this crisis and continue to deliver output? So yes, to your question, it builds a leader and it builds company culture, these types of crises, but it's also part of the job to be able to communicate well during these periods.
Yeah, sure. And we spoke earlier about how, I guess, your career started in sports betting. You're now at a business where there is that betting element, but there's also this media element as well. When did your interest sort of, I guess, shift in kind of converging those two, bringing those two together? What was sort of the inspiration for that?
I would say that goes all the way back maybe to the early 2000s. To maybe this isn't something that many people are aware of, but to have a successful online sports betting business, the critical part is not your product. It's actually the media alliances and relationships that you form. You can have the best product in the world, but if you don't have reach, you can even have the best brand in the world, but that'll create your awareness. But again, if you can't deliver that brand to large audiences, your business is not gonna grow. So it was very apparent to me that those relationships were key to the success of online betting businesses. And what you can notice since then is this relationship is symbiotic. Media companies, sports media companies, and sports betting companies have always had this dependency to each other, but it's an inefficient relationship. But margins are so high, profitability was so high for so many decades that this inefficiency didn't matter. But I've always felt that there was an opportunity to bring these industries together and make it more efficient from a business angle, but also make it a more seamless experience from a customer angle. And now that both industries are now struggling, fragmentation, media space, monetization models that no longer work in digital like they did in the analog world, regulation increasing in sports betting, cost of content increasing in sports betting. So there's pressure to be more efficient. Unit economics are not working anymore. So hence, by necessity, both businesses need a new business model that's more efficient.
Yeah.
And that's when our convergence model starts being really successful and timely.
Sure, and I guess that's what led you to LiveScore Group ultimately, right?
Yes.
In 2019.
That's correct.
So,
so behind that strategy, we've been able to raise a very substantial amount of funds to the business, and we continue to get quite significant interest in funding and investing into our business. Since 2019, our revenues grew from 10 million to just this last financial year where we closed at 130 million. And we went from, I think, about 40 people in 2019 when we became an independent company to over 700, close to 800 people now. So our success has been remarkable, but a lot of investment has gone into the space because it's not cheap to build such an ecosystem. You need the best people to deliver the best technology so that you can cater to millions of users with our products.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned, I found it interesting earlier, you were talking about during the pandemic being able to communicate authentically to your staff. And then I guess you mentioned there the investment that LiveScore has had as well. I suppose there's an importance of being able to communicate authentically to your investors as well, and potential investors, and also being able to communicate a vision very, very clearly. Is that something that you've a skill that you've learned as well in terms of being able to have that clarity of vision and being able to go out to investors and say, this is what I want to do, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is how your funding is going to help me get to that point?
It's a skill I've learned through failures. Early on as an entrepreneur, I've pitched amazing ideas that I was certain everybody would see the same way I would. I guess, same with many startup entrepreneurs. You understand that there's a technique to being able to pitch an idea. The human mind is very defensive. It doesn't like ideas that change, certain beliefs or certain existing business models. The key part is believing in yourself. So if you bring that belief into the room, but pitch it with the right technique, understand the audience, whether that's hundreds of people or whether it's just 2 people, you need to learn what the audience is expecting. And then, through experience, you fine-tune that pitch to a point where you know how to communicate so well that within minutes you start getting engagement, and then you have to maintain that engagement level and get the audience to a point where they're no longer defensive and they're using their analytical mind to be able to evaluate the opportunity you're presenting to them.
Yeah, sure. I guess there's there's a pressure of obviously pitching to potential investors, but even once those investors are on board, there's a pressure of delivering for them as well. But then you've also at the same time got to deliver for the consumers too. I guess the question I want to ask is, how do you kind of cope with that pressure? Is there, it's a lot of pressure for one person to man, but how do you kind of deal with that?
Well, I have a great team,
Yeah.
so I freely distribute and delegate that pressure across many of my colleagues. But in a company that is pursuing a vision that you really believe in, a strategy that you and your entire team is behind and is already working, these pressures become pleasures. You of course would prefer an environment where everything is going according to plan and your projections are identical to your performance. But I'm a believer in the zigzag theory, where the path to the peak is not a straight line. If it was a straight line, everybody would be able to do it. So you expect these difficulties, and that's what you take this job. And we've been lucky enough that we've had investors supporting us from the beginning, that believe in our vision, that believe in the strength of the team. And I think we've shown enough traction now that it's all about continuing to ride that momentum, even though obviously the various different types of crises that we've faced kind of change our trajectory based on not exactly as our projections. But we're on the right path for sure.
And just asking about in terms of the growth of the company now, just because one of your colleagues telling me that when he stepped in the room in 2019, it was something like the 40th employee, and now we sit here today in 2023, it's more like 700, as you mentioned, across 9 offices, key markets in UK, Ireland, Nigeria, and Australia, I think. Across loads of different times.
Not Australia. He is from Australia, though.
Okay.
I can see.
But I mean, so different. There's different time zones in there. Different facilities, people of different backgrounds, different cultures. How do you kind of, I suppose, cope with all that, and the speed of that growth as well must be quite a challenge to do that.
It's been unbelievable. We hired 500 people during the pandemic. So without having any personal contact, face-to-face communication, we, I believe, managed successfully to keep our culture and to be able to onboard all our new joiners with our vision, with our strategy. And the only way to achieve that was constant communication. I had personal onboarding sessions with every new joiner during that period. And that was about a dozen people every week that we would do, multiple sessions, talk about strategy, talk about vision, talk about culture, just over-communicate. And we've learned this through experience. We didn't have a playbook to go with. Nobody teaches you at school, how to maintain company culture during a period of high growth while you can't, have coffee with people and have a conversation face-to-face. But we understood what worked really well, and we stuck to it. And by the time pandemic was over and we returned to the offices, but still in a hybrid way, we're 800 people. We've had difficult periods where the economic environment forced also us to change our size in certain departments. But again, through good communication, transparency, and authenticity, we've managed to get through.
Yeah, that's great. And when you mentioned there, sort of almost 12 onboarding sessions a week you were involved in. And when a company is growing so quickly and you're so invested in it, and I imagine it's sort of, you almost feel like you're always on, I guess, because I think about now there's so much of a focus on workplace culture, employee burnout, those sorts of things. But I think about the person in charge of all those people. No one ever thinks about the leader, Sam, do they? So I mean, are there ways are you ever able to switch off? Are there things you do to decompress at all?
When I got the CEO job, and when we decided we're going to start this business as an independent company in 2019, I got a similar question from a colleague. He knew how hard I worked until then. and he said, how are you going to cope with this additional responsibility? We're getting a lot of funding. There's going to be pressure from investors. How will you deal with it? And my response was, I think I will work less, I will meditate more, I will exercise more, and I will have to eat better, because I have to perform much better than I do right now. So it's working more efficiently rather than working more. And I've learned how to manage that really well. And I would recommend it to anyone who thinks working more hours is the answer. It's certainly not. You'd be surprised to know how many problems you solve while you're at the gym, while you're meditating, or while you're taking time off. So it's all about efficiency and the return on your time, rather than the amount of hours that you put into it.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you find being the most rewarding part of your job?
There's one thing that I can never get enough of. It's somebody joining our company, listening to our vision, and lighting up in a one-on-one onboarding session. Because every time it's a validation. And when you see someone that is good at their job, listen to that vision and choosing your company as their future growth environment and believing in that vision and just saying, I get it. That's the most rewarding moment in the business.
For sure. And just one more question before I let you go, Sam, because I'm conscious I'm sat here standing between you and the lunch buffet over there. But yeah, we spoke a little bit before about how you think your own leadership style has evolved in the last 20 years, and I guess leadership generally has evolved in that time too. But we are kind of going in a period of change at the moment, I suppose, in this post-COVID world, and also as we mentioned with the macroeconomic headwinds. How do you expect the role of the leader to evolve in the coming years? What are you sort of expecting?
That's a great question. I think the pandemic gave us the biggest social experiment we've had in the history of humanity, not just business. And I think it taught us leaders how important it is to show empathy, to how important mental health is, because we both suffered from it in some shape or form. We've witnessed how important it is to take care of our mental health, in addition to physical health in the workplace. So a lot of new areas have been embedded into our ways of working. So you have to be a business that takes more and more care of its employees, needs to be more aware of problems that in the past may have been excluded as part of not business. These are personal problems. Like I said, you need to show more empathy. And also, you need to be more purpose-driven. You have a lot more participation from your employees. They want to understand why you're pursuing a certain vision, why you're implementing a certain business model. They need to believe in the business and the leadership. So these are all really areas that surfaced more after the pandemic, and we're still making adjustments and learning as we go along. So I think the key part is keep asking the questions. What would you like us to do more? What is important to you? And make sure you pay attention to the data and make the right adjustments over time.
Awesome, Sam. I think that's a nice note to end on. Thanks so much for chatting and sharing a bit about your career. And
thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you.